to today's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast, your channel for super easy, no-nonsense advice on how to declutter and organise your home. Please welcome your hosts, professional organisers Ingrid Jansen and Leslie Spellman.
Hello and welcome listeners to episode 126 of the Declutter Hub podcast. I'm Ingrid. In today's episode, I'm talking to Jen Gale from Sustainablish. Jen is an ordinary knackered mom of two whose life changed when she dragged and cajoled the family into a year buying nothing new. That year changed not only what she buys, but also how she sees her place in the world. And Jen recognized the power that we all have as individuals to make a difference to the things we care about, simply through getting informed about the impact of our daily choices and figuring out easy swaps and changes. She is the author of the Sustainablish Living Guide and the Sustainablish Guide to Green Parenting. The family are still just about talking to her, and they live in Wiltshire here in the UK, where Jen writes and podcasts about all things sustainablish. Oh my word, I'm going to trip over the word sustainablish, I think a couple of times, Jen. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
We are delighted that you are a guest on our show, and we know our listeners are going to be interested in this topic. Now, I have prepared, I must admit, extremely well, because I kind of stalked you a little bit on your Facebook page and your Facebook group and your website, because I'm so interested in what you are having to tell us. And I'm reading your book. I really was trying so hard to finish it before we had to record this podcast, but I'm about halfway through, but I just love everything about it. So let's get started, Jen. Okay. A year of buying nothing new. So can you take us back to the beginning and kind of explain to us, when was this and why did you start this whole journey?
It was quite a while ago now. So it was 2012-13. The kids were 4 and 2, something like that. And I'm still not entirely sure why I decided we were going to do it. It was definitely my idea. I was the driving force behind it. I read an article by a lady who'd done something similar, and she called it her secondhand safari. And I think I just thought, oh, that sounds like quite a fun challenge. I wonder if we could do that as well. And at around the same time, I remember being in a shop with the kids, one in a buggy, one kind of holding your hand, and the eldest just in typical toddler, wanted that. And just being like, whoa, he's already tuned into this need for stuff, this, desire for new, shiny things. And in hindsight, it was completely normal toddler behavior. And I think all toddlers do it. And I'm not sure what the evolutionary advantage is to it, or whether it is a sort of societal thing. But I was quite sort of shocked by that. And that was really the start of it. So I sort of tentatively broached it with my husband, who's quite used to me having lots of air quotes, amazing ideas that, never really come to anything because I soon get distracted. But so he sort of said, oh, yes. And assumed I'd forget about it, I think. And then I didn't. So he kind of had to get on board.
You're like, oh, this idea actually stuck in her head. Are we all doing this? We're doing this. So did you kind of make a whole plan, or did you just kind of stumble into the whole thing? Or was it like, okay, right, if I'm going to do this, I want to think this through. How did that go?
Yeah, I'm not a great planner. I feel like so fraudulent being on a decluttering and organising podcast. I'm one of the least organised people in the world. But I sort of read about it in the summer, I think, and decided I wanted to do it, but couldn't possibly wait until New Year, which would have obviously been a sensible time to start. So decided we were going to start 1st of September. Did actually do a practice month in August without telling the rest of the family, just to kind of see what kinds of things came up. And it was things like birthday parties and stuff that, it was quite good to have kind of thought about that. I came up with some rules so that we had some sort of boundaries. So we said we could buy food, we could buy toiletries, medicines, underwear, because I think most people would draw the line there for secondhand pants. And if something broke, when we needed a new part to fix it, it kind of made sense to do that. And also because the kids were so little at the time and I was worried about their feet, I didn't want them to sort of be cramming their little, delicate feet into shoes that didn't fit. So we said we could buy them new shoes. But I think, that's the beauty of that kind of challenge, whether you want to do it for a week or a month or a year. You can make it so that it's still a challenge, but it's something that will work for you and for your family.
Yeah. It sounds like an amazing challenge. So did you think in the beginning it was going to be mainly focused about clothes? Because I think when I hear your story, you think, okay, I've made some exceptions, like food, obviously, medicines, shoes. So did you think it was going to be mainly clothes, or did you already think, there's going to be loads of other things that are going to be affected by this decision to do this for a year?
Yeah, I don't think I even really thought in that much depth about it. The things that I wasn't expecting were the things like birthday presents and Christmas and things, which obviously, Christmas is a massive consumer time of the year, why that hadn't occurred to me. And I guess, things for the kids, you don't want toys and stuff like that. And I didn't want it to be about deprivation and sort of austerity and just saying no a lot of the time to things. Whereas actually, it was super easy to find the vast majority of things we wanted secondhand. It might have taken a little bit longer, but once you start to look around, it's quite scary how much stuff already exists and is already out there without constant new stuff being brought into the world.
Yeah. So you started blogging about your year, didn't you? Because that's how it all started with kind of what you're doing now. Started with the blog, didn't it?
Yeah. And, I'm not a particularly techie person. I used to be a vet, so science background and things. But it really reignited, I guess, a sort of a love for writing that I hadn't even really appreciated was there. Again, I did it without even sort of thinking it through and thinking of what I was trying to achieve with the blog or anything like that. I think it was a very useful tool in terms of keeping me accountable and sort of keeping me going. I'm not sure if I would have stuck the year out had I not had that sort of public, like, this is what we're going to do. But also, found this whole community of people doing similar things, caring about the same things that I did. I couldn't find that locally to me. Like I remember my dad going, why do you go into charity shops? Like, it just wasn't part of the way we were brought up and things. It wasn't really part of our sort of friendship circles or anything like that. So, it was quite a new thing for me and for us to be doing. But it just, like I said, opened up this whole community, which social media gets a bad rap a lot of the time, but it can be such an amazing way of connecting with people all over the world, and sharing a message and supporting each other.
I know. I agree. I mean, that's what we're doing with the podcast and our social media and our Facebook group as well. And we just love it that we bring together all these like-minded people. And for you, I think it's people who want all things sustainable. For us, it's decluttering and organizing, but there's so much overlap between us, isn't it? That's why I was so excited about recording this podcast as well. Just for the listeners, a charity shop is thrift shop or an op shop. So I thought, let me just remind everybody that we all use different terminologies.
Yes.
So throughout the years, you did your whole year, you started your blog, but then lots of stuff has happened to you since, hasn't it? With the website and your Facebook group. And so can you tell us a little bit about that? How did it kind of go to this next levels for you?
It was really always been really organic. And, I said when I started the blog, I sort of didn't have really particularly any expectations of it. Obviously you always want your blog to be the number one blog and is going to crash the internet. But that I would say yes to any opportunities that came up. So when I actually approached our local radio station, our county sort of BBC Wiltshire radio station, to go on there, and they said yes. And then it sort of spiraled. So I got a reasonable amount of press during that year. I was very active on Twitter, was invited to do a TEDx talk, which was like my first ever public speaking experience, which was absolutely terrifying. And then it's just sort of carried on. The reason I started the Facebook group was because I was finding what I wanted on the page was for people to feel able to come and to ask questions or to share things that they'd done. I think there's something psychological there, isn't there, around maybe people feel like that's my page and for me to almost broadcast information on maybe, whereas a group feels very different. And I'm sure you've probably found this with yours, and people are much more willing to come and be a part of a group and to ask questions and to help other people out and things. And so that's why I started the group, to provide that kind of community and that support and for people to have that space where they could come and share together.
So after you're not buying anything new for a year, what were your next steps with your family then? Did you do a buy nothing at all year, or have you really kind of What are the changes that you've seen in your own house over the years after that first year? How did it kind of continue then within your family?
Yeah, it's really interesting because lots of people asked me as we were sort of coming up to the end of that year, oh God, like, what's the first thing you're going to go out and buy and what, and I was like, actually, I can't unlearn everything I've learned over the year. Like I said, at the start, it was quite a naive challenge almost. I hadn't joined up the dots between the things we were buying and the people who were making it, or where it was being made, or what was happening to it after we no longer wanted it. And bear in mind, this was, 8 years ago. This was before David Attenborough's Blue Planet 2, before all the plastic awareness. This was before Greta and the school strikes. And so climate change was being talked about a little bit, but certainly not in the same way it is now. But yeah, you can't kind of learn all that and join up all those dots and then rush out to Primark or H&M and go and fill your wardrobe up again. It totally does change your perspective on the things that you're buying. I mean, I didn't buy any new clothes from the high street, and I haven't bought any new clothes from the high street since that year. I have bought new clothes online from ethical retailers and things, but then I did a year buying no clothes at all, which I would say wasn't as fun. You just get very, very sick of the clothes that you have got. But again, a real kind of awareness of the fact that a lot of the time it's not that we need new stuff. There was nothing wrong with the clothes I was wearing after a year, and most of it was just bored to the back teeth of it, and I guess we have the luxury, most of us, of being able to replace our clothes so much more regularly. So yeah, I had this slightly naive idea that the kids would come out of this as really, anti-consumers, and obviously they were too little to even really know. And I have the same challenges as everybody else does with their kids wanting all the shiny new toys and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting because when I picked up your book, what I really like is that you give a lot of information, but you're not like you have to do this and you have to. That's why I think I like it's called sustainable-ish.
Yeah.
You're trying your best. You do what you can. You become more and more aware over the years of everything that's going on, and exactly indeed like how do the products that we buy get actually into our shops, and what happens to them once we don't want them anymore? Mm-hmm. What happens to all of these things? So can you maybe share some facts and figures about how much we throw away? Have you got maybe one or two stats for us available?
He reaches for her copy of the book. So, I mean, in terms of fashion, it's huge. And I can't remember. Let me see if I can flick through. But the fashion industry, we're all aware of the impact of things like aviation. But aviation, and this isn't saying, giving everyone permission to fly willy-nilly. Aviation is about 2 to 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. The fashion industry is 10%. So to put that in context, you really do see that there's a huge amount. And the problem is that, this concept of fast fashion has only really been around since the 90s. And I sort of think, I think the 90s was like last week. Like it was like 30 years ago, but it's only in that time that we've had sort of developed this concept of fast fashion and this idea of almost 52 seasons in a year and just stuff being made and churned out. And, there are literally, I can't remember because I can't flick to the page quickly enough, but like literally lorry loads of textiles hitting landfill like every single minute pretty much. Like it is a huge problem. Even things like food waste. It's not necessarily the thing that we would declutter or anything like that. But, food waste is a huge issue. 50% of food waste occurs in our homes. So, as consumers, and I hate to label people as consumers because we're so much more than that, we have a huge potential to make a difference to this by being more thoughtful about what we buy and your end of it, kind of how we dispose of it. But the thing that I've found, and I'm not a declutterer at all, I'm really, or, you can see the background of where I'm sitting, but having gone through that really difficult, painful, hard process, hopefully at the end of that, you're then that much more aware of what you're bringing in because you're like, God, I really don't want to have to go through that again. So you're much more careful and aware of what you're then bringing into the house. So hopefully going through that process helps us all be more thoughtful consumers.
That is true. And that's what we see happening in our membership, Jen. The people who have taken out a year's membership with us and are going through the courses and are decluttering, it's like during that journey, that path they're on, the light bulbs are going off and they're like, oh, wow. Because I'm working so hard on decluttering, I'm much more aware of what's coming into my house. We talk a lot about clutter blindness at the moment in our forum, in our internal kind of message board. We got our own forum in our membership. And clutter blind is a big thing at the moment, where people say, the shells are falling off my eyes. I see stuff that's probably been there for years, but I just stopped seeing. And then once you get that and you get that decluttering and the clutter becomes less and the home gets more peaceful, it's like, now I want to work far more on what's coming in, and do I actually need it? Do I want it? Am I going to use it? Am I going to wear it? Where does it come from? Where is it going? Does it match with anything else that I have? And all of those things. So the flow of stuff that comes in becomes smaller, which is, of course, I think a really good thing.
And there's so many parallels there with what you just said. I think people's sort of journey into taking or sort of eco action or whatever you want to call it, in that I think a lot of the time we have these shutters or these, we think that's not our problem to deal with. That's not something I can do anything about. And we subconsciously choose to sort of look away from it a little bit and to not acknowledge it and to not see it. And then whatever triggers us to suddenly like, no, actually, this is big and I do need to try and do something about it. I remember one of the members in my membership going, I wanted to just run up and down the streets shouting at everyone and, does Boris Johnson know about this? Like, this is really important. Why isn't he doing anything about it? And it's the same thing. And then you probably get the same feelings in decluttering then of like overwhelm, like, oh crap, like there is a lot of stuff here that I need to deal with. And that's exactly the same with looking at the climate crisis. And then, that feeling of empowerment when you do make a start, and it is all about making a start and making that first step, and then just following it, doing one thing, the next thing, and keeping going, and that feeling of empowerment, and I can make a difference to this. It's really interesting, the parallels that exist.
Yeah. I want to come back to this for a minute, but I just saw something on your website the other day which I loved. It was a quote. I don't know whose quote it was, but it says, we don't need a handful of people doing sustainable living perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly.
Yeah.
And it just was like, mic drop. I'm like, this is like such a good quote. Yeah. And it's the same what we say to our lovely members in our Facebook group as well. Don't think of decluttering as I have to do my whole house. Just start with one thing.
Yeah.
And one thing leads to another and another and another. And then you've done a drawer, and a drawer leads to a cupboard, and a cupboard leads to the top cupboards in the kitchen. And then you dig your kitchen and you build it up. And I just love that quote so much. And I thought, yes, it is about a small action. You don't have to go from nothing to I'm going to be a complete eco warrior overnight. It's not possible.
And I think that's something that really puts a lot of people off. There's so many stereotypes around being green or eco-friendly, especially the sort of hippie eco warrior type. And a lot of people won't aspire to that. It won't appeal to them. And this idea that you've got to go from where you are now, you've got to almost go from A to Z. Well, no, actually you don't. You've got to go from A to A.1. You've got to go, you don't have to do that. And I would love to take credit for that quote. There's a brilliant blogger called Anne-Marie Bonneau. She's the zero waste chef. And I kind of tinkered with it slightly because she says we don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions doing it imperfectly. But, it's exactly the same principle. And, I was thinking about this the other day, and I just thought it's this idea that, you don't need to do something perfectly, but you do need to do something.
Yeah. Okay, so
no
perfect.
Enough.
So that's perfectly leads me into my question then. So most of our listeners are decluttering and organizing. So where can they start? What can they do to be more sustainable? Where do you begin? Do you begin with recycling your toilet rolls?
For different people, there will be different ins. Like plastic is a great in for a lot of people because it's so visible. Like you unpack your supermarket shop and you have the, 2 carrier bags full of plastic that you now got to kind of put in your landfill bin or deal with somehow. So that's very, very visible, and that can be a really easy in for people. But also, I think supermarket food shop is probably one of the most difficult things to tackle in terms of plastic. So maybe then have, if plastic is something that you want to look at, have a look at your bathroom, because that's a much easier place to start. So either look at, shampoo bars. Everybody bangs on about soap and shampoo bars. My confession is that we don't use them. We tried and really struggled. So now we get big, I think they're 5 litre bottles. of shampoo and hand wash, and we fill our own bottles. Or if you're lucky and you have a local zero waste or refill shop near you, you can use that. But yeah, I mean, things that you might not even think about, things like changing your energy supplier. I mean, that is a huge impact thing to do. Bulb, one of the renewable suppliers here in the UK, reckon that you could cut your carbon footprint by a quarter just doing that. And once it's done, it's done. You know, it's a boring thing that we put off and it sounds like it's going to be really onerous, but actually it can be done in 10 minutes. Like, it doesn't have to be really difficult. There's a great website called Big Clean Switch that you can go to, and it will put your bill in, you know, your latest bill in. So it gives you an accurate quote, and then it will give you different quotes and you pick the one you want. Like, literally, you know, you can do it in an ad break. So that is like a really big impact thing to do. I mean, in terms of, you know, getting organized, I'm sure you probably have a unit on this in your membership, but information sort of IT organization, you know, I had emails from 2010, you know, and all these emails, we don't sort of see where they're living, but they're living on these massive servers somewhere, probably out in a desert somewhere or whatever. And they're taking up a huge amount of energy keeping those servers cool. So actually, you know, if we can go through and just do, I don't know, depends how many you got, 50 a day, 100 a day, because you can do it while you're sat in front of the telly in the evening, you know, just be deleting some emails. That's a really nice, easy place to start.
And if, for example, if somebody's decluttering their kitchen or their clothes, are you really a big advocate of people bringing stuff to the charity shop and using things like FreeCycle and Freegal and Olio and things like that? Is that important?
Definitely, because, you know, when we throw stuff away, somebody in my membership said the thing that got her really thinking and kind of started on her journey was this phrase that there is no away. You know, we're really lucky in the UK in that we have an infrastructure in place whereby we put our bins out, the magical bin lorry comes and collects it and takes it away to the mystical land, and we never have to think about it again. But actually, everything we've ever thrown away is sat in some landfill somewhere, or it's been burnt for energy. And when it goes to landfill, it just kind of sits there. We have this idea maybe that in landfill things sit and they sort of rot down and create this lovely compost. They don't, because there's not the right conditions, and it sort of ferments and it creates methane, which is a really potent greenhouse gas. So not only are you getting that release of methane, also all that carbon, all that energy that's been used to make that thing, to grow that thing, those raw materials, to get it to the shops, that's all just completely wasted. It's all just gone. And so much of the stuff that we throw away, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that, you know, we're bored with it, or we fancy a redecoration or whatever. So making sure, almost taking responsibility for those things, and it's our responsibility to rehome those things, to pass on those things, and to make sure they stay in use. And I know it's not always the case. And, you know, one of the things that really puts me off decluttering is this, you know, I hate putting things in the bin, and I know there will be stuff that just has to go in the bin. So therefore I just ignore it and I don't do it. And, you know, the charity shop is a nice, easy, or feels like a nice, easy solution, because it's almost this get out of jail free card. I've bought too much crap that I don't need anymore. I'm giving it to the charity shop. They're earning some money from it. Other people will be able to use it. I'm a really good person. I'll polish my halo and off I go. The problem is that because it's so easy, well, there's a few problems. Because it's so easy, it probably doesn't disincentivize us hugely from recluttering again, you know, because we haven't gone through a hugely painful process trying to get rid of it. The other problem is, especially when it comes to clothes, we have this idea that we donate it to our local Oxfam or whatever, and then Doris down the road goes into the local Oxfam and she likes it and she buys it. That only happens to 10 to 30% of our clothes. The rest can't be sold in store or can't be sold in the UK and is bagged up for the sort of textile trade, which is $1 billion trade in sort of secondhand textiles, and is shipped abroad, where it's causing huge problems. And in the same way we saw, I don't know if people remember sort of 2017-18, these sort of mountains of plastic being accumulated in China, where we're just shipping our plastic abroad, out of sight, out of mind. The same thing is happening with our textiles in Africa and in developing nations. And there's a video, I think it was on our ITV, just mountains of rotten textiles there, because they're just swamped as well. And they don't want our poor quality, fast fashion cast-offs. So it's really difficult. And obviously, you know, again, if you donate something that's broken, they haven't got the resources to fit, the charity shop haven't got the time or the volunteers, the resources to fix that. If you donate a jigsaw and it's got a missing piece, that can't be used. If you donate a toy that's broken, you know, anything that you wouldn't buy, don't donate, because they can't use it. And all you're doing is cutting out the middleman and alleviating your own guilt and passing that guilt on to some poor volunteer at a charity shop who's got to lug it all into their landfill bin. And obviously they have to pay for their landfill as well.
Yeah.
So if you are going to donate to charity, you know, do it really mindfully, pick the best bits, you know, pick the things that you think will be sold on really easily and are in really good condition.
Yeah. I think it's true because that's what we hear a lot in our membership and in our Facebook group, that people say, I feel so guilty about throwing things away. It's what you touched upon as well. I know there's no other way but to throw it away, but I feel so guilty about that. It's so hard to do. And I think what Leslie and I have been talking about is like, just say no in the first place, especially to all the freebies.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, I think we go to McDonald's about once or twice a year, if we even make it there, because we like to cook from scratch and we like to cook ourselves. So I remember going back to the counter going, my kids, I know they've got a Happy Meal, but they don't put the toy in. And the people at the counter were like, what? I'm like, we're going to end up throwing it away. I don't want it in the first place. But it's the same with the buy one, get one free in the makeup. You know, when you buy makeup, you get this extra product in a weird color that you're never going to wear. So
but
now
you're
I'm
really
like,
excited about getting it because it's free.
I know. And then I'm like, no, I don't want. And the lovely ladies in the shop are like, well,
can't compute,
why don't you want it? It's free. And I'm like, but I'm not going to use it. So I don't want it. It's going to clutter up my cupboards.
Yeah.
So I think really think about all the freebies that we get, the bags when we go to a conference, maybe ever again. I mean, we're in the middle of lockdown now. If we ever go to a conference or a concert, or they constantly put stuff in your hands. It's like, do we actually need and want all this stuff? Right. So do you think lockdown has had an impact on in your life, how you can be more sustainable? Have you seen that within your Facebook group? Because we've had a lot of people, I can't donate, the charity shops are closed. Has it had an impact, you think, lockdown?
Yeah, definitely. I think certainly that first lockdown where, you know, it literally felt like the world stopped, didn't it? And I think so many people were furloughed and were home and, you know, weren't trying to juggle working from home and everything else that was going on. So probably a lot of people then did do the decluttering and things like that. And, you know, don't forget, you mentioned Free Cycle, Freegal, Olio, places like that where you're donating your things within your local community and you're much higher chance that those things are actually going to stay in use and be used again. I mean, I touched on food waste earlier, and I think there were some stats from the first lockdown that food waste initially went up because of so many people had been stockpiling stuff that they then couldn't use in time. But then it really dropped because everybody had more time to be cooking from scratch. Everybody, you know, you didn't want to just be popping down to the shops every day. We were all trying to just do a weekly shop. So we really used up what was in the cupboards. We really made sure that we didn't waste those leftovers and things. And I think there were some stats saying that food waste dropped by about a third during the second half of that first lockdown. It'd be really interesting to know if that trend was sort of continued. But yeah, you know, I think I remember you said before we started recording that you, during that first lockdown, you were like, can we even talk about decluttering during a pandemic? And I was exactly the same. Can we even talk about sustainability and the climate crisis during another much more immediate crisis? And actually, I sort of put that out there and I decided I was going to do this sort of online festival in May of that lockdown. And oh my God, the response was huge. I think people were so desperate for something other than COVID, were so desperate to feel like there was something they could make a difference around. And so I do think that it has made a difference, hopefully.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's really interesting that you say that, because my husband and I always have been quite good at doing a weekly shop and using up as much as you can and having as little food waste as possible. But one of our members signed up for Olio and is now a food waste hero. I think. Yeah. So she was so enthusiastic. So I've now signed up for Olio as well, besides my local Freegal group, because I thought you just never know if we have something that I just rather give it away. And it's just been so fantastic to see all of those initiatives really gain momentum. And I think it's wonderful that awareness has grown so much as well. I mean, we already, I think, back in the 80s and 90s when I was in Holland, we were quite on the forefront at the time when I was growing up there with recycling, and all the other countries have really caught up, which is the thing. I think Holland now, I don't know where they are now. I haven't lived there for a long time, but it's just so nice to see that there's more awareness. But I think it all stems from the less that comes in, the less you have to deal with on a daily basis and then have to deal with what goes out, right? So how do our listeners keep up the momentum so they're listening to you and think, okay, I need to do more on being sustainable? So they're gathering a bit momentum, listening to this podcast. They're going to look at maybe their food waste. They're going to look at their plastic bottles. They might think, okay, I need to start buying some more in bulk instead of having all the small single packaging. I kind of realized when I was preparing this podcast, I thought, okay, Ingrid, Your next step now is to I have reusable shopping bags, but I still have like plastic bags from bread that I buy at my local baker that I love. I think my next step now is to go, okay, I want to take those out of landfill and make sure I'm being good and consistent in gathering them together. Yeah. And another thing I want to do is the makeup that's empty. I don't use a lot of makeup, but of course we get like makeup mascaras and things like that. I know there's recycling points. So I know those are my next steps. But how can our listeners keep up the momentum when they are thinking, okay, I'm going to go on this journey? Have you got top tips? Have you got some good websites that people can check out to get inspired?
Yeah, I think, this is the point when you sort of, exactly as you say, I want to do a bit more, but then you go, oh, well, I could do this and I could do this, or I should do this and I should do that. And then you go, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I feel it's too much. I can't do anything. And exactly as you said, pick one item, pick one drawer. So either pick an area of your home that so like your bathroom is a really good place to start. Or you mentioned the book, and in the Sustainability Living Guide, there's 12 chapters and there's 12 months in the year. So maybe you decide, well, okay, January is going to be conscious consumption, February is going to be food, and so that you have a way of chunking it down so that your brain isn't going, don't forget this, don't forget that. And you're like, it's okay. I know I'm going to come to that, but at the moment my focus is plastic or my focus is waste. And then, a really useful thing is to try and find some way of measuring it, because a lot of the time when you declutter, it's probably relatively easy because you can take a before and after picture and my God, you can see the difference. If I say to you, switch your carbon footprint, and you might save a quarter off your carbon footprint, you see no difference whatsoever. That's quite demoralizing. The things that you can measure, like food waste, like plastic, like your landfill bin, take a picture of your food waste for a week, or take a picture of how full your landfill bin is before the bin lorry comes, and then say, well, that's my goal for this month, is to halve that or to drop that by a quarter. And then think about the strategies that you can use step by step and baby steps. Progress over perfection. No step is too small. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. All those kinds of things. It's all about imperfect action, and the imperfect is important and the action is important. Don't get hung up in, oh my God, I could never be zero waste, or I could never be plastic free. God, I couldn't either. But it doesn't mean I can't do anything. So try and pick some of those nice quick wins where you really see a difference. And I think to keep you motivated as well, find that community, whether that's a local group that are doing things, or whether you find your community online. People are more than welcome to come and join the Sustainabilish Facebook group. If people want a bit more support, I've got this membership called the Knackered Mums Eco Club that, has much higher touch, much more resources at your fingertips, all those sorts of things. But, there are lots of ways out there, and it's about finding the things that resonate with you, but do find that support, I think, because that's so important.
Yeah. And I think it's true. I think it's the same with decluttering, isn't it? Decluttering by yourself is never any fun. But when you've got somebody there who's going through the same thing and the same emotions, you got to get inspired and you together want to move forward, isn't it? And I think, sustainability can go hand in hand with decluttering, but you can also say, I'm just going to focus on the decluttering and then I'm going to work on this. You don't have to do everything. No. So if you're listening to this podcast and think, yes, but I'm in the middle of my decluttering journey and that takes up all my brain power, do that and then go, okay, what can I kind of tag on here? Yeah. What can I do to, and you know what, when you declutter your kitchen, for example, and you are already finding things in your cupboard and you think, oh, that's still in date, but I'm never going to eat it. Maybe you can then go, I'm going to put that on Olio. Let me sign up. I'm going to put those couple of tins on Olio instead of them left in my pantry, forgotten, never to be seen again until 5 years later when they're 3 years out of date, and then nobody can eat it anymore. So you can kind of hook the sustainability into your decluttering slowly but surely. Definitely. And we are not about perfectionism either. This is not about making beautiful before and after pictures, and this is not about having whole houses beautiful on the images. This is about, hey, I've done my cutlery drawer, and everybody goes, yes, well done. And I found some chopsticks I'm not going to use. Let me put those on Olio and see if somebody wants them. It's the small things, but all those things together, that's what makes a real difference, doesn't it?
And I think that's one of the really great things about community as well, especially around sustainability, is those small actions that we do individually come together to make a big difference for us as individuals. But actually, when you're then part of a community and you can collectively see the impact of your actions, we've got in my membership a sort of group litter pick goal for the amount of litter we want to pick this month. And there's a brilliant website called Geeky Zero, which measures your carbon footprint and allows you to sort of, input some data to see it coming down. And we've got a group in there, so we collectively see our carbon footprint coming down. And that's when you really see the power that we have as individuals to contribute, to be part of the solutions, really.
Yeah. Time is nearly up, Jen, but so I've got, I could have had another 15 questions for you. So I might have to have you come back at one point, because we haven't even talked about the pyramids that are in your book that I'm absolutely digging. So we need,
can
you please come back at some point and let's talk some more about sustainability.
Yeah, no, I'd love to.
Thank you. Last question then. What would be your top tip when starting on a sustainable journey? If there's anything that you think, okay, one thought for Ingrid and Leslie's listeners, that's the thing.
Pick one thing. Exactly like you said, pick an item you want to declutter, but pick one thing you want to do. So whether it's, I'm going to make sure everybody in the family's got a reusable water bottle, or I'm going to actually remember to take my reusable coffee cup out with me when I go out, or, you said, it's the bread bags, or it's so, because it is such a big, overwhelming thing. So pick one thing, make a start, do that thing, do it imperfectly, doesn't matter, and that will give, and then you'll be empowered to go on to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But, just take it a step at a time.
Right, listeners, one step at a time. Exactly is what we're always saying in the Declutter Hub. Break it down, one little chunk, and the same goes for sustainability. I will put all of your details, Jen, in the show note, your website, Brilliant. All your social media. I will put that big clean switch in there as well that you mentioned. Yeah. I'm going to Google that, put that in. I will also put in the show notes a podcast that Leslie did with her two friends who did a no spend year as well. So it's one of our earlier podcasts. It feels like ages ago. So we'll put that in as well, but we'll definitely put in all the details so people can find you and check you out, and the details for your book, etc. as well. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. So listeners, what is the thing you are going to do that's going to make the difference for you? What's the one thing you're going to put in your schedule, in your planning? Maybe it's just start small. Maybe it's I'm going to recycle my toilet rolls because they're from paper or cardboard and they can go into my recycling bin. Maybe that's where you want to get started. So thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate you hanging out with us today. And if you've enjoyed this podcast and think, wow, other people would love this podcast too, do share it with your friends and your family. And on the show notes, you can find all the sharing buttons. If you want to have more handy tips from Leslie and I, please go to our Facebook group, the Declutter Hub community, and we'd love to see you there. If you don't want to miss the next podcast, subscribe to the Declutter Hub podcast and it comes into your notifications each Friday. So see you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast. Check out declutterhub.com for more inspiration, and don't forget to tune in next week.